A man sits at a family dinner, smiling at the right moments. He answers every question with a calm, measured voice. He pays the bills, keeps his promises, and rarely complains. To everyone around him, he seems steady, reliable, strong. But when the house falls silent and the lights go out, there's a strange emptiness he can't explain. Not sadness exactly, not anger, just distance. As if somewhere along the way, he stopped feeling life as it happened and started watching it from behind thick glass. This doesn't happen overnight. It happens one swallowed disappointment at a time, one conversation avoided, one heartbreak never spoken aloud, until eventually, silence no longer feels like a choice. It becomes an identity. There are 4 psychological stages many men pass through when they spend years hiding what they truly feel. And the first stage is the most deceptive because it often looks like strength. For generations, many boys were rewarded for emotional control, but rarely taught emotional understanding. Behavioral scientists distinguish between regulating emotion and suppressing it. Regulation helps us process difficult experiences. Suppression often buries them without resolving them. Research in psychology has consistently linked chronic emotional suppression with increased stress, strained relationships, and reduced well-being. At first, suppression can seem remarkably effective. The man becomes the dependable one. He stays composed during conflict. He solves problems instead of discussing feelings. Others admire his resilience, while he quietly mistakes emotional numbness for maturity. Yet the brain keeps records the mind tries to ignore. Emotional experiences are processed through interconnected systems involving regions like the amygdala and prefrontal cortex. When feelings are repeatedly pushed aside rather than acknowledged, they don't simply disappear. They often resurface indirectly through irritability, exhaustion, chronic tension, or an unsettling sense that something meaningful is missing. The tragedy is that many men don't realize they're losing access to joy at the same time they're trying to avoid pain. And that's where the second stage quietly begins. The second stage isn't emotional collapse, it's emotional substitution. When a man can no longer recognize what he feels, the mind often translates those hidden emotions into something easier to manage. Anxiety becomes constant busyness. Loneliness becomes endless over time. Grief becomes irritation over small inconveniences. What looks like anger is sometimes fear with nowhere to go. Psychologists call this a defense mechanism. The original emotion doesn't disappear. It changes its appearance. The man insists he's simply tired, stressed, or not the emotional type. In reality, his inner world has become increasingly difficult to interpret, even for himself. This confusion affects more than his private thoughts. It reshapes his relationships. Partners may feel shut out, not because he doesn't care, but because he struggles to put internal experiences into words. Friends stop asking deeper questions because they always receive the same answer: "I'm fine." Researchers have long observed that emotional disclosure strengthens trust and social connection. It's not dramatic confessions that build intimacy. It's the quiet willingness to let another person see what's happening beneath the surface. Without that openness, even loving relationships can begin to feel strangely lonely. Perhaps the greatest irony is this: the man who hides his emotions to protect the people he loves may gradually become someone they no longer feel they truly know. But the damage isn't only relational. After years of emotional silence, the body itself often begins carrying a burden the mind refuses to acknowledge. And that's where the third stage changes the story in ways many men never expect. The third stage reveals a truth that medicine and psychology have been uncovering for decades. The body often expresses what the voice never does. A man may tell himself he's coping just fine, yet his body begins telling a different story. Sleep becomes lighter. His patience grows shorter. He feels constantly fatigued, even after a quiet weekend. He can't point to a single crisis, but life starts feeling heavier than it used to. Researchers in psychophysiology have found that chronic emotional suppression is associated with prolonged activation of the body's stress response. When the nervous system remains on alert for years, elevated stress hormones can gradually influence sleep, concentration, cardiovascular health, and immune function. Emotional pain may be invisible, but its biological effects often are not. This doesn't mean every unexplained ache or restless night comes from hidden emotions. Human health is far more complex than that. But it does remind us that the mind and body are partners, not separate systems. What burdens one inevitably shapes the other. Many men respond by trying even harder. They become more disciplined, more productive, more self-reliant. On the surface, they're succeeding. Internally, they're surviving. Anthropologists have noted that throughout history, men rarely carried life's burdens entirely alone. Whether through tribes, military units, apprenticeships, or close circles of trusted companions, emotional support was often woven into daily life rather than reserved for moments of crisis. Modern life has quietly stripped away many of those spaces, leaving countless men surrounded by people yet emotionally isolated. And isolation changes perception. After enough years, silence no longer feels like something a man is doing. It begins to feel like who he is. That belief becomes the greatest obstacle of all. Because once silence becomes identity, breaking it can feel like losing a part of yourself. And that leads to the final stage, where the possibility of change finally begins. The fourth stage begins with a realization so quiet that many men almost miss it. The problem was never that they felt too much. It was that they had forgotten how to recognize what they were feeling. Psychologists describe emotional awareness as a skill, not a personality trait. Like any skill left unused, it weakens over time. But unlike many abilities, it can be rebuilt at almost any stage of life. The brain's capacity for adaptation, known as neuroplasticity, allows new emotional habits to form through repeated, intentional practice. The first changes are rarely dramatic. A man notices frustration before it becomes anger. He admits disappointment instead of burying it beneath another hour of work. He tells a trusted friend, "I've been having a hard time lately," and discovers that vulnerability doesn't diminish respect. More often, it deepens it. This doesn't mean expressing every emotion without restraint. Emotional maturity isn't the absence of self-control, nor is it constant emotional disclosure. It's the ability to understand what you're experiencing, choose how to respond, and remain connected to both yourself and the people who matter. Researchers like Brené Brown have argued that vulnerability is closely tied to courage rather than weakness, while decades of attachment research suggest that emotional openness strengthens secure, resilient relationships. The strongest men are not those who never struggle. They are the ones who refuse to let silence become their permanent language. Because after years of emotional distance, the greatest transformation isn't learning how to speak. It's discovering that the part of yourself you thought was gone was waiting for permission to be heard. The silence may have protected you once, but it was never meant to become your home. Every man carries stories he never tells. Some are buried beneath responsibility, others beneath pride, and many beneath years of believing that silence was the price of being strong. But emotional strength has never been about feeling less. It's about understanding what you feel well enough that it no longer controls you from the shadows. If this story resonates with you, let it serve as a reminder that no matter how many years have passed, emotional awareness is not something you either have or don't have. It's something you can rebuild. One honest conversation, one difficult reflection, and one small act of courage at a time. The years spent in silence do not have to define the years ahead. Sometimes, the strongest decision a man makes isn't carrying the weight alone. It's deciding that he doesn't have to anymore. If this documentary gave you a new perspective, consider subscribing for more evidence-based explorations into psychology, relationships, and the inner lives of men. And if there's one insight that stayed with you, share it in the comments. Someone else may need to hear it.